I've been invited to speak to a group of high schoolers about the importance of nonprofits and community service. If you had to connect with the students, what would be the most important things you'd want them to know? I'd love to hear your thoughts on inspiring the next generation to make a difference.
I think it's actually easier than you think. I think this is what I've noticed in kids of this age is that they're already sort of finely attuned to what's going on in the world and would love to have the opportunity to do something like this. I was lucky enough to teach for a while. I taught at UNLV. I taught social entrepreneurship, and the students that came through that program, and they're just right out of high school, right? These are still kids, and every single one of them was, and it was mostly an entrepreneurship program, so they weren't necessarily there to do nonprofit work or to do work in the social sector somehow. But every single one of them was really passionate about coming up with something that they could do that would make the world a better place. So one of the projects that we had is they needed to design a business that somehow interacted with a social cause that they were interested in. And the easiest part of that for them was identifying the social cause that they were interested in. Every single one of them, because that's the first step, is like, okay, before you think about the business, let's think about something that you want to be different. And they had them immediately. It didn't even take them any time to like think about researching social issues. They all had one like ready to go in their back pocket. So I think for me, having them recognize that for all of these things that they're concerned about in the world, that there are people that are working to make these things better. Anything you can possibly think about, there's somebody that's working to make that better. I think there's a Mr. Rogers. This is like a super famous anecdote, so it's not me. I don't know it personally, but right after September 11th. So Mr. Rogers taped an episode almost immediately after September 11th, and go look. It's up on YouTube. I'm sure it's probably up on the PBS website as well. But it is absolutely a masterclass in how to talk to people about problems, about things that are going wrong, things that are hard to understand, and we don't know why it's like this. And what he said basically was, look for the helpers. There's always somebody helping. There's always somebody that immediately jumps in to try to solve this, and look for them, because that's the person that you're going to want to work with. So I think it's the exact same message to high schoolers, which is if there's a social issue or something that you're concerned about, find your pod, find the group of people that are actively trying to solve this, and get in good with them. And I think you will connect with these folks absolutely just immediately, perfectly, without any effort at all, because they're already ready to go.
I love all of that. And piggyback. And Mr. Rogers, you brought us full circle. Wow, to Mr. Rogers. Oh my gosh. That's a blast from my past. So the other thing, I think, when you're talking to students, I mean, this is really for anybody, not just students, right? But our high schoolers, is thinking about just having it be, I think it's a conversation, right? And it's talking to them. It's asking them questions about, what do you care about? What's on your mind? What keeps, like, when you think about the world, like, especially because particularly in today's day and age, the younger generation is thinking about all these topics and is really like, how do we get engaged and involved and roll up our sleeves, like a very active approach. And so I think asking them some questions to reflect and saying, these are the things you might like think about. And then as far as like what's important for them to know, I think the possibilities are important for them to know. You want to inspire them so they want to get involved, and you inspire people by other stories of other people like them doing it. So, right, you find that really cool story, and we know you can find anything online these days, and there's, groups that specifically are all about youth and philanthropy in action, right? But you find that story of like, here's a few different ways, and some are like mind-blowing, like social entrepreneurship stories, like what Andy said, and like much bigger things, and some are more like, hey, I went to whatever, the soup kitchen, the homeless shelter, whatever. I did this weekly and that like was so cool. Or whatever. Like, so you kind of show different degrees of it, but you show the possibilities, because sometimes people I don't even think know what is open to them or what exists. And I think the other thing is like the stories of how they can make an impact in a way, how that each one of those actions, because I think sometimes the barrier, people are always like, I don't have enough, whatever, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough time. And for kids, like, oh my gosh, like what, like whatever, like, okay, it's one more thing. So like, how do you make it kind of something cool, like the cool factor? And you do that by sharing some cool stories and then just getting them to talk about it. Like, right, that's inspiring and it helps those people. And there's going to be people in the room who are going to be innovators and want to come up with their own idea. And then there's going to be others that listen to those stories and go, I want to do something like that. I also think like giving them a list of like some resources, because that's the next step. Like, how do I, like, so you get them inspired, they know they want to give. What do you do from there? And so like what you do from there is say, hey, and here's how you get started. Like, here's whatever XYZ resource, here's this, here's a list of where you can find all volunteer opportunities. Different states have different, kind of databases, online databases with that kind of stuff. And so people, they don't even know those resources exist, although they're probably like thriftier than someone my age at finding them themselves. But it's like, they're more tech savvy, they'll figure it out. Right. But still, like pointing them in that direction.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my pal Stacey Wedding, and we're here to answer all your nonprofit questions. So the way this works is you send questions to questions@nonprofiteverything.com, or you can go to our website, nonprofiteverything.com, where there's a nice big Ask a Question button, or you can reach us via email or on our socials or any place else. Catch us on the hallway. We love to collect your questions and do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them, we'll bring in a guest expert. When we haven't done that in a little while, you need to start asking us more complicated things, so we have to bring in a guest expert. I think that's your challenge for this next period. Thanks for joining us again. We really appreciate that you've taken the time. And with that, we'll jump right in.
I'm looking for information on using funds raised for your mission rather than keeping them in reserves. Is there an industry standard or best practice as to the timeline for using funds raised, particularly if the funds are not needed for operating costs? Also, I should clarify that these aren't grant-restricted funds either.
I love this question. So I think... So we'll talk about the bad side of this first. There are some of the ratings agencies out there, and I won't name names because they'll come after me or they'll be mean. Some of the ratings agencies actually out there will specifically talk about reserves as being negative. So if you have a certain amount of money, you'll actually get dinged by some of these rating agencies because you have that money and it hasn't been deployed. And what they do is a calculation between how much money you have in reserve and what your annual operating costs are. And they've got this totally made up rationale, which is when a donor gives you money, they expect you to use that money for your mission immediately. Like, that's their rationale behind why they've got this weird requirement in there. The reality is that we're not in an exchange transaction business. Like, what we're doing as nonprofits isn't, you give me some money and I'm going to give you a cheeseburger, right? It's not that. It's, you give me money, I'm going to help solve this social issue. And so what that does is it gives us the freedom internally to determine if I've got a particular activity that needs to happen, whatever it is related to my mission. It may be more important for me to do that right now, or it may be more important for me to do that later, depending on what the challenge is. So Red Cross, God bless their souls, gets nailed with this every time there's some kind of natural disaster, right? There will be a hurricane hitting Florida because it's a Tuesday, right? There'll be a hurricane hitting Florida, and you'll see lots of noise in the air about don't give to the Red Cross because the money you give them right now isn't going to go to solve this particular hurricane right now, which, as we know, is patently absurd because what Red Cross wants to do is have the money a year ago to be able to handle the hurricane that just happened, right? That they're not just like waiting for the money to show up. They're intelligent people who are saying we need to have this money in reserve so that we're prepared to hit the ground running as soon as we know that there's a problem, and not, oh, we're just going to wait for, people and whoever to give us $25 so I can go buy water to give this person water. That's a stupid way to run your business. So the fact that a ratings agency has even baked this into their ratings metrics is gross. It's just like they don't understand, and somebody made up a rule and let's put it in because we don't know anything about anything and we'll rate people. So I think it's going to be very specific to what the mission of your organization is and how your organization works with its community to be able to answer that question effectively. So is there an industry standard or a best practice? Absolutely not. And I would tell the ratings agency to go pound sand. There shouldn't be, because it's very specific to what it is that you're trying to do. I don't think it's, because you can think about it intellectually. Like if people are giving us a bunch of money and we can solve the problem now, should we sit on it? Well, no, probably not. We should probably try to solve this issue or deal with it, whatever our mission is. Is there something that we can get if we do a big splash at a later date? Is that going to have a bigger effect? Maybe. If so, maybe we should hang on to reserves. Maybe it's important for us to think about far future rather than tomorrow. Maybe that's an important thing for us to think about. So it's a great conversation to have internally. I think this is something that you should have as an internal policy as when you're putting your revenue plans together to say, okay, well, we're budget for next year. We have this, and this is how it comes up too, is that you talk into your board and your board's like, why do you have a surplus on you see you've budgeted a surplus. Why are you raising more money than you spend? And one of the answers might be, well, because it might be important for us to have money to spend later. Or why do you have a deficit? Well, because we raised a lot of money 3 years ago and now's a really good time to spend it. It's important for us to do this now. And the money we raised 3 years ago. So we forecast a deficit, which is going to push me right into the rabbit hole about why nonprofit financial statements should be totally different from for-profit financial statements. But that wasn't the question. So I'm going to let Stacey say something.
I don't think I have a whole lot of brilliance to add to this. I think you answered it really well. And I do think it's just, again, these weird formulas or things that really don't take into account the complexity of our own organizations. I was actually I'm going to go off on a little side note, but when you were talking about the Red Cross, I was reading an article the other day that was just talking about the sad part about natural disasters or any of this crisis funding type giving that we go after is that people give immediately because they want to relieve their whatever, the sense of pain or loss or the guilt of not helping in some way. And so they give immediately. And yet the recovery efforts and the money needed, it goes on for a decade after some of these natural disasters. And we don't talk about that as a sector, right? And so thinking about this kind of thing related to the organization, I just think it draws home the point. I mean, I would say typically I see a lot of organizations shoot to have kind of a minimum reserve of 6 months. But again, that's I don't think you should use that as a gold standard. It depends a lot on your organization and kind of the type of work it does.
Yeah, that's that budgeting piece of it. Yeah, because I think the minimum that you ever want is to be able to cover depreciation, because that's your board can kind of understand that. So I wouldn't ever really present a budget that doesn't cover that, because that's things decaying that needs to be replaced over time. But beyond that, exactly it. It's totally dependent on your specific scenario at any given time and what your nonprofit does. So yeah, don't listen to anybody on this one. Don't even listen to us. Just do what you think is right. how can we help funders realize the importance of capacity building investments over program support? It's such a short question. It's like it's one sentence, and yet it contains so much.
Yes, Andy, like my head, it's spinning and twirling like, yeah. Gosh, don't we wish? That's where my magic wand, if I had one, would come in, right? Wave it and make that happen. So I think a few thoughts I have on this. I think some of what we have to do is get into talking differently. People gravitate toward what we send messaging out about. So if I am always saying, and finding ways to say something that still gives you capacity building dollars in the way you message it and talk to funders about it, but in a way that doesn't, that still connects it to your outcomes. I think what the nonprofit sector struggles with sometimes is they kind of keep capacity building separate in their messaging and from like program fundraising, and they don't connect the two, right? To say your investment in us is actually going to lead to better program outcomes. Your investment in, this new technology is going to actually help us, work harder, faster, more efficiently, so that we can actually serve more people. And I don't think the sector does a great job at sometimes connecting those messages together. And instead it's just like, oh, we need this new piece of furniture or equipment, or we need staff training. And it's like, well, okay, but I want to actually see your organization and those you serve impacted by that. And so how do we start to connect those dots? And so I think the way we message it is critically important. And it's not, I don't think in general people know how to tie those things together. And so sometimes it's about the story. Sometimes it's about, hey, we invested it this way, or this funder. So that's one key thing, right? Any funders that are investing in this way, how do you bring them in the fold to actually be the hero, to shine a light on what they did that actually catapulted you and helped you serve more people or help serve people more deeply because of their investment in whatever, XYZ, in your capacity, a new staff position, infrastructure, whatever. So I think that, and then talking to those funders, any of them, if you have them, and say, what is it? Like, how do we make the case to others to get them on board like you? Or how do we do that? Because they probably can help you think through like how you talk about it. I recently was talking to a private donor who is very, 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 very much about, no money goes to staff, no money goes to any of these things, the thing that we're all very sadly too familiar with of people thinking about their philanthropy this way. And when I was able to actually relate it to his own business and like think about how you made money and think about like, and turn the tables a little bit and share it from like, how would that have worked for you if, someone told you they wanted this level of detail of where their dollars as a customer were going, like, or you didn't have the tools to do what you did. And it was kind of like the light bulb, like, so how do we talk in their language, sometimes take it away from our mission and like talk about them, like they're like, hey, you're probably thinking about it like this. And not becoming defensive, because it's easy to become, I am the worst, right? Like I get protective of the nonprofit sector and I'm like the biggest champion, like, come on, folks, get on board, like blah, blah, blah. But, that doesn't resonate. So like, how do we make it so it's about like, what is it that you're really trying to accomplish with your gift? And can I tell you how you can get there? By doing it in this way, right? Like by investing in this. So those success stories of where other capacity investments have actually helped catapult you forward and like move your numbers forward, and then using other funders who do it as a role model. I mean, those would be two key points I would take. And I mean, that's very organizational thinking. I mean, I think on a broader sector scale, we need to just start talking about it differently with how we're talking about philanthropy, and talk about that, it can't we're not willing to maybe take a donation unless there's some piece of it. Like that's scary. Everyone is like, no, I'll do whatever. I'll bend to whatever this donor's whims are. But we've got like, as long as we keep doing that, the more we perpetuate it. So at some point, what do we say is, let me educate you on why like I've got to use the investment in this way, or like how we're going to divvy this up, and how ultimately I'm going to report back to you on who was served because of your investment. I promise you it will be just as much as always it has been, if not more, because we've become more efficient or productive or whatever the word is. So I don't know. Those are some initial thoughts. Andy, how about you?
So I think this one is the answer is different depending on who you're talking to. So the question used the word funder, and funder has no meaning to me. It's either you're writing a grant, which means something's written down on paper, or you're just having a conversation with the donor. So we'll take the second one first. So if you're just having a conversation with the donor, I think you just need to be very clear about what the outcomes are, the ultimate outcomes of what their gift are, and not intentionally make it like restricted to some particular purpose accidentally, right? So this is something that catches maybe less so than it used to, but back when direct mail was like the thing. And actually, I'm not going to say that, because we still see it in email campaigns. So somebody will do like a mass email campaign, and then they'll realize, like after they've actually sent it and people are starting to send money back, that they've unintentionally put a program restriction on it because of the way they wrote the email. They said something like, your donation will feed these particular people, or something like that. And then they didn't realize, oh gosh, now we have to use this for food for this exact group of people, because that's what it said in the email, and that's what people think they donated for. And we have to just sort of use the implied restriction, because you always have to go for the most restrictive reading of anything. So that happens a lot, where you'll see somebody unintentionally restrict something. So number one is just don't do that. So when you're having conversations with donors, if anything's ever going to be in writing, make sure it's as broad as you can make it. If it's just a conversation you're having with them, talk about outcomes. Talk about what the ultimate goal of the gift is, and not what the technical detail of delivering the service to get to the goal is. So, because to be honest, most donors are super responsive to the goal. Mm-hmm. So if what you're trying to do is end homelessness, let's talk about ending homelessness. Let's not talk about buying tents, right? So because those two, that might be the way that you're delivering the solution, but the donor doesn't kind of care. Like they're not really all that interested in how you're specifically doing it. I mean, they are on a macro level. They want to make sure that you're not just buying a helicopter because helicopters are cool. They want to make sure that you're going to be effective at reaching the goal. And that they get that from other kinds of things too. They don't, like the way you're talking to them, the way you explain how the program works. Like all of those things are baked into whether or not they think you're going to be effective at meeting that goal. So I'd say that's number one. Number two is, if this is a grant and it's a grant application and somebody's making you fill out some piece of paper, then sometimes the person that's writing the grant application may be under weird preconceptions about what they want from you. And so they may give you a chart of accounts that has very specific lines that you need to like drop information in. And when you do that, so if there's a line for like, program supplies, and you have to like put in the amount of money for program supplies, there's this weird give and take that you have internally that I've noticed lots of organizations do this, where they're like, well, if we ask for what we need, we might not get the money because they're going to think that we're not being efficient or we're not being effective with our ask. So let's load the ask more toward the programmy things and less toward the capacity building overhead, like big, what we actually need for the program, because we feel like the funder is going to respond better to that. So don't do that. If you've got it, so we need, as a sector, we need to do a better job of training funders to understand that what they're trying to fund is a solution and not to micromanage how we're delivering the solution, right? That's something that we have expertise in, and they need to trust us. And if you don't trust us, give the money to somebody that you do trust. So I want you to build up this level of trust, show that we're really good at doing this thing, and that this is what we need to do the program. So we can go in for days. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is making sure that you have an all-in cost for a program. so that when you're talking to a funder, like if I'm going to serve 50 people, I need this much money. And that covers everything, including things like capacity building, including things like giving us a little money to expand over time or to replace equipment or something that's run out of its useful life that we need to replace, right? So we need to know what that dollar amount is in order to fund that. And then we can talk to the funder about, for $50,000, we can serve this many people. And that should be the level of detail that they need. And then they can go back and say, okay, so does $50,000 sound like a reasonable amount of money to provide this outcome? And if it does, great, you're golden. If it doesn't, then maybe you need to think about how you're delivering services, or maybe you need to find a donor that's less interested in that kind of thing, right? So, but coming up with that sort of all-in, sometimes we call it an all-in cost. I'm a really big fan of cost per unit of service. If you can come up with a dollar amount to do one thing and it's got everything baked into it, it's really easy to talk to a donor, because then it's like flexible. You're like, well, for $10,000, we can do 10. For $100,000, we can do 100, right? And then because it's all in, if they give you $4,362, you can say, okay, that's 43 units of service, and that's what we respond to. So I think being careful, there's a bunch of words, and I'll just summarize it down into make sure that you're not the problem in this scenario, right? Because the funders a lot of times don't know what they're asking. So it's up to you to be honest with, like, if you want us to do this, this is what it's going to take, and let them make the decision, and not like try a head fake and like, we'll just jam it all into this one category because we think that's a sexier category, which then you hamstring yourself in the future. So I could have just said that. I didn't. I talked for 20 minutes.
I loved the whole context, because I do think there is a big piece of this that is about how do we take the conversation. I relate it to what I always say to clients that when I have executive directors that are saying, what do I share with my board? I'm like, the more in the weeds you go with your board, the more they're going to follow you down there, right? Yep. So how do we control the message? How do we control the way we're positioning this, and keep it about what is actually what lights people's fire is, wow, I'm going to, change these lives. Here's these outcomes. Here's this impact. Here's the need that's out there. Like, keeping it at that higher altitude can keep us out of some of that. And I realize that let's just be candid, Andy, you and I, you've alluded to it. We've seen plenty of grant applications or grant proposals that sit there and have I want a detailed line by line item program budget, can't include whatever, anything that could be indirect cost or any of these overhead expenses. And, and at that point, I think you have to really say, as an organization, like, do we have another funding source that can help then augment that? Are we willing to do this? Yeah. Right? Like, are we willing?
Yeah.
So,
and some of the ones that are really specific like that, they're reacting to the way a federal grant application is written, right? So you may get a municipal grant, and they've seen federal grants, and they're like, kind of, it's an attorney that's never done it before, and they're like, I just copied some of the stuff from this. But then they'll throw in things like, there's no overhead. Well, just as of October 1st, overhead for federal government gets to go up to 15%, right? So the de minimis is now 15%. So if you have the opportunity to talk to somebody who's designing these things, and it says things like no overhead, and they've got it really like specific out like that, you can say to them, if you feel comfortable, you can go back and say, look, you've copied a lot of this context from a federal grant, which allows 15% overhead. So why do you think that the way that you've written this with this level of specificity shouldn't require that as well? And, if you're lucky, you'll be able to talk to a human. It's the private foundations and the family members that just copy nonsense from Google and go, here's what we're giving you. And if there's no line of communication going back, either don't apply for the grant at all. Just, say, sorry, we're not interested, right? Like, for example, for organizations that I work with, if there's ever a grant contest, where it's like, you and 5 other people can go present to these ladies and they're going to decide. Like, this is like my least favorite thing in the world. Like, I always tell them, never do that. Never, ever do that. And write a letter back to the people writing the contest saying, here's why we're not going to participate in your dog and pony show. Like, it's expensive. We have to do all the work to put this together. And at the end of the day, you never fund us for all like the money that we think we're going to be funded for. And so it's just not worth our effort to do this. When you decide to grow up and provide funding in a better way, more equitable fashion, we'd be happy to participate with you. And if all the nonprofits did that, like all these groups would have to say, okay, I guess we shouldn't do that anymore, right? Nobody wants our money because we're too annoying, right? But if that's not the case, like, and you can go back to them, there are two things you can do. You can either say, we don't want the money at all, or you can say, we would be happy to apply for this. However, we have to have a self-imposed match included that says we have to raise $10,000 from private donors in order to accept your money, because your money is missing $10,000 that we need to actually do this program, right? So you can include that in the narrative and say, yeah, we would love to go for your $20,000 grant, but we need $10,000 from another source to be able to accept it. And we need to have that from someplace else. It can't be from existing money. It has to be from new money. And they'll either say, oh, okay, I get it. So let's, maybe we can go to 30,000, or it gives you the free option of saying, yeah, we can't take the money because that money's not available, right? To let them know that what they're doing is a disservice to the sector and that we're not just, beggars on the street taking whatever you hand us. Thanks again. We really appreciate you. Thanks for working in the sector, doing what you do. Sometimes, especially when we get to this part of the year where it becomes very fast and very complicated, you may ask yourself, why am I doing this? And the answer is because we need it. Because those of us that are called to do this, we just have to do it. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And send us questions. Again, questions at nonprofiteverything.com. There's show notes and a whole bunch of information on the Nonprofit Everything website. So if you head over there, you can get a full archive of all our shows. There's also categorized questions. So if you're looking for something specific, there's a fair chance in 160 something episodes that we've already answered it. So you can do that too. But send us your questions. Even if we've done it before, we like doing it again. We like putting new shades on it. And who knows, our opinions change all the time. So you might get a different answer if you ask us the same question twice.